Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Scions of the Southland. It is the week of February 24th. We are recording this on a Monday because some of us have some scheduling conflicts later this week. Mr. Grant, do you want to explain yourself?
Well, I don't know who at the ACC network decided that they like to give us 9 p.m. basketball games when they're at home, but that'll be super duper fun tomorrow night. Trying to get ahead on some studying here so I can justify going to the game. But yeah, if that's not a typical tech problem, I don't know what is.
You know, the 9 p.m. basketball slot is just like the 11 a.m. Football slot. You don't want to really be in either. I don't think the 9 p.m. slot is like prime time. I don't think that's super prestigious.
Nope, it's just late, and they fill the television with it. But I'm a sucker for sports, so I'll probably be there.
Yeah. Speaking of sports, we have a lot of stuff to get to, and we're starting to burn the midnight oil here on the East Coast. So let's start with a rapid fire round with this weekend's action. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, lay it on me.
All right, let's start with number 3 men's golf. They jumped above number 2 nationally, Oklahoma. I want to say this was in Hawaii, Florida.
Puerto Rico.
Close enough. It's out in the sea. And you have noted here that a redshirt freshman, Bartley Forrester, which is the most golf player name I think I have ever heard, won the whole dang tournament. Give me a quick thought on that.
His name also sounds like a car, so that's interesting.
That too.
It was great to see a good show from him. Don't see a lot of red shirts on our golf program. It's probably because it's a small team, but he also played on the 5 line of the scorecard, so it was good to see a win come off the bottom. I don't know. We see a lot from Noah Norton. We see a lot from Andy Ogletree, Luke Snyderjans, Strafacey, the older guys. So yeah, no, good to see Bartley step up, and we kind of needed him too. He was playing the best, and we didn't win by a ton, so he was probably the margin that we needed in there. And then, as always, taking home a trophy in a match with a bunch of good teams is nothing to frown upon. It's practice for the end of the year. Winning lines against teams like this is not something I'm going to turn my nose up at.
Yeah, no, trophy games are trophy games. I'm good with it. Not going to argue with it either.
Dude.
All right, moving on. Men's tennis dropped 2 matches this past weekend. The first to number 10 Tennessee, in which they got swept 4-0, and then the other in which they fell 4-2 to number 33 Miami. What did you see in this one?
Well, breaking out my fancy schmancy new UTR ratings, courtesy of one Ethan Kreger. I don't think we could have really expected much else against Tennessee, and Miami was closer, but again, you drop a point here, you drop a point there. They were close in that one too. We were ahead on the court that was suspended when play stopped, so again, closer maybe than 4-2 indicates. Could have been 3-3 before they closed out the 4th point. But I don't know. I thought men's tennis was going to be stronger than the women this year, who we'll get to later. Not saying I'm disappointed because it's a young team. Carlos Tavar came into the season injured, but it seems like they need a couple things to break their way. They're young. They got to swallow their pills somewhere. It's tough in the ACC. We're going to see a lot of good competition. Very balanced midsection of the conference this year. So stuff like the Miami match will start to fall their way. Hopefully, knock on some wood there. But I don't know. Not anything too crazy from them this past week.
All right, moving on. Something a little bit similarly mellow. That was a poor transition. diving and women's swimming at the ACC Championships in Greensboro, North Carolina this weekend. Tech placed three gals in the top three. Cami Hidalgo finished first in the 1 meter diving. Ruben Lechuga finished second in that same event. And then Cami Hidalgo followed that up with a second place finish in the platform diving. There were 4 NCAA B cuts. Let's do. I don't know. I watched a little bit of this on ACC Network, but honestly, not enough for me to glean anything substantive away. What do you think?
I think it really reflects kind of the themes we've been poking at for not just all year, but kind of the past couple. Not even going to call it a top heavy team for the women. They have a couple that can get in the mix for B finals and C finals, but you're never going to get a conference championship if you can't put a single person in an A final. Ilgen Fritz looked a little bit off in the 1,000, but she did come back with a nice showing in the 500. She's probably their best pure swimmer. And the diving was solid at the top. I will go as far to call that top heavy because we put Lechuga in second. Still wound up in 9th on the men's side of diving. Women swimming and diving combined got
that's
12.
My bad.
Yeah, not great. I will say aberration. If you want to see Miami, who does not have men's swimming, first place in the ACC in men's swimming and diving, they have not gotten to the swimming part of the men's ACC championship. So Miami currently sits in first. That's a fun little twist.
Weird,
but yeah, no. Tech's women. They had good times for what they had been swimming in relays, but really you can't win if in both sprint relays you're getting dead freaking last. The only teams behind them were, I believe, Boston College, Pitt, and Miami. Miami, again, small swimming school. Not going to trash them or Pitt. I know people at both schools. And at Boston College, too. Wow, what is it with me? And having intimate connections to the bottom third of the ACC. They're not the class of the conference. And the recruiting class that came in, I don't really see that changing much. They lose their best swimmer. I wouldn't expect a lot from these gals next year. Maybe one of the B cuts will get an entry into the NCAAs. That's what happened with Iris Wang 2 years ago, but last year she missed out because NCAA swimming is whack. I could take 10 minutes to describe it all, but basically there's 2 stages of cuts, A and B. B are conditional depending on the total number that get in. So we won't know what it looks like until all the A cuts and their subsequent B cuts are finalized, and then they can take from the pool of conditionals. Yeah, no, not to be a downer, but it wasn't great. We look to see more from the men this coming week, the fairest way to put it, because the men are top 25. Again, because this is the ACC and we love country club sports and things like that, we might still get 7th despite being in the top 25 in the country. And at that point, it's just a numbers game for how many will swim on another meet at NCAAs.
Okay. Well,
is that fair? I'm not trying to be a hater because I love swimming, obviously, but it's just hard sometimes,
Yeah, and I will say I did watch. I think I watched the C final that Caroline Lee was in, and she swam really well. But to see Tech, I mean, even let me find the words to put this. They placed 9th, like you said, and they were in that position for the majority of the meet, and then at the same time there was a good 150 points between them and the team in 8th. So not a particularly productive outing is how I would put it.
Well, and they did that despite getting Cami Hidalgo coming back from like a rough year the past calendar year, getting her back and having her podium twice, a first and a second. Tech's numbers look a lot different if you don't have diving, you know?
Yeah, it should be an area of focus and an area of growth to develop those the swimming portion. I don't remember exactly what year Hidalgo is, but assuming she has made 2 years of eligibility left, you probably want to make the most of that while you have it, especially when
Yep.
competing at the conference level.
We just need to see a little more depth too, honestly. Like diving, like again, a star diver. Emily Ilgenfritz is grand. You got Hepler with 2 cuts. She's come into her own. A freshman who won ACC weekly awards the past week. You don't have nothing, you know. They have something to build from, but you need a. Not saying you need a Kyle Pampudis because that's a once in a generation swimmer. You know, the men are very lucky to have him, but you need something else, and they just don't have that.
All right, moving on to softball, which was at Samford this weekend. They played 4 games. They lost
5.
to DePaul. They played 5. Counting is hard. So run ruled versus DePaul. That's not great. Edged by number 11 Kentucky in extras right at the death in 8 innings. Not great, but battled. Upset Kentucky in the next game, and that was a scorcher. Kentucky could not get anyone on base. Then just gets past Samford in a pitching duel, and then comes up short against Samford in the final game, which I believe was a Samford walk-off. Honestly, I don't have much to add beyond your little summary here. I was really impressed with how Emma Koff played again this weekend. Awald started hitting with a lot more power this week, started to get into a groove. Nelliman was also very impressive throughout the weekend. They're 5-8, 5-9 coming out of that weekend. They need to pick up some games coming into the meat of the season right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's tough. I don't like openly, I guess, explaining away problems. That I try not to pull punches when things aren't going great. See women swimming, but I don't really want to hate on them either. Like softball lost a 1-run game to Kentucky this week. They lost a 1-run game to the top team in the nation 2 weeks ago to Washington. They barely got edged by Samford, which is not a great team, but not a terrible team either. The DePaul loss isn't great, but I don't know. Other than DePaul and I guess UAB, we haven't really seen clunkers. You know, like these have been games that Tech is in. I think one of the ACC Big Ten games was not awesome either. But you know what I'm saying? Like, there's only 3 or 4 of those 8 losses that I'm like, wow, we didn't.
The margins, the margins at this level are just razor thin, and I think something that both of us touched on while we were watching, I think it was the Kentucky game. The infield defense has definitely regressed over the last, like in this year, and especially to open this season. It's a little sloppy, I will say.
Yeah, you saw it in the UAB game particularly, and that was the first game of the year in flurries in Atlanta after just days and days of rain.
Off.
You'd think like that. That's why we didn't talk about it back then, because it's like, oh, that's reasonable. Like first day jitters, schedule's weird. It's cold. It's snowing. That's weird. But like there comes a point where you gotta tighten it up. And my favorite baseballism is, you're going to win 60 games. You're going to lose 60 games. It's what you do with the other 40 that matters. And right now, Tech has, allowing for some rounding, slightly more than a third of their games and lost 2/3. But half of that 2/3 are these games that we're talking about. A great Kentucky team by 1 in 8, barely losing to Samford, essentially in a one-run game, right? And then a one-run loss to the best team in the country. Those are those games of inches, those games of thirds. It's what you do with that middle chunk that's going to turn the difference. And right now, Tech needs to pick up this game against Kennesaw. They have they got the state game postponed. That probably would have been a win. We do well against them. Granted, you're not going to make the tournament if half the games you win are against your, I guess, patsies. But they need to turn the corner in some of these close games. And Murphy's Law. Anything will happen that can. Hopefully, some of these start to break Tech's way.
Okay. Let's round out the stickball sports. Baseball swept Ohio State with minimal incident. The hitting was back. Pitching was also much more solid than what we saw in the opening weekend. I don't know. There's not much more to say there. It was a good weekend. They put up, if I can do some mental math here, 29 runs to Ohio State's 10. I'll take it.
I'll take it too. You're the baseball editor, and I was in Gainesville, so you're definitely more able to speak on this than me, considering I caught exactly the last 5 innings of the series in person. But I don't know. All the signs point to good for me. We're waking up. It's kind of like what we just talked about with softball, them tightening up, getting out of that first weekend. We kind of yet to see that from softball, but baseball is, since whenever they got back from Statesboro, it's been all that,
Yeah, and I think you do have to hedge a little bit. You mentioned in your piece in Yellow Jacket Roundup that they played defending Big Ten tournament champions Ohio State, and that means a certain amount. But at the same time, I think you got to hedge just a little bit, considering one, Ohio State, the Big Ten as a whole in terms of baseball is, and then number two, Ohio State, yeah, they won the Big Ten tournament, but at the same time, they went to the Nashville regional, lost and won 1 game, and then lost 3 games and got eliminated. And I think one of those games was to McNeese that they barely won, and then they lost to Indiana State and Vanderbilt, and I think one more other team, if I remember correctly. But they lost to Indiana State and Vanderbilt by a lot. Those were not pretty games, and so you do have to take that into consideration when you're talking about a team like Ohio State. But I will say that the level of competition provided by Ohio State and Cincinnati last weekend is much more realistic and much more preparatory to ACC play than playing, obviously, St. Peter's and to a certain extent St. John's, result in that latter game notwithstanding.
Yeah, and even then, Georgia Southern.
Right.
I will take caveats with Ohio State's losses in the playoffs. Vanderbilt won it all. Over Michigan, who the Ohio State beat on their way to the Big Ten tournament crown, and Indiana State. Don't sleep on Missouri Valley Conference baseball. I know that's usually a basketball thing, but I will also remind you that Bradley, for example, is 1-0 all time against Georgia Tech. And also baseball beat baseball.
Watching that game at all.
Yeah. My dad sure
2 years ago. That was not fun.
Yeah. I think I did the write-up for that game afterwards, actually. But
yes, because you were very happy. You were conflicted.
I was conflicted. But no. Ohio State, I think the 5-2 game on Saturday, that was Saturday, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's the most indicative, right? We can't expect 12 runs every game, but it is good to see that Tech can still, 12-6 out-hit the other team when their pitching is on. They can out-duel the other team 5-2. So, these won't be the hardest guys we play this year, not by a long shot.
And I will say in that second game, I think that was it was the Saturday game when Lonsway was on the mound for Ohio State, and he was dealing. He was doing very, very well at the mound. He just was not getting help from his outfield. There were just a lot of mental errors for Ohio State in that game, and if left up to Lonsway, he would have absolutely locked it down. It's just that you have a bloop or a random double off of a drop fly ball in center field that puts a runner in scoring position, and then that's when the hit parade begins in that game. I think it was Barron Radcliffe, Colin Hall, Luke Waddell. They all get on base, and it starts building against Lonsway, especially once he adds a couple walks in that inning, and it's. Like I said, I think, like you're saying, this is a good performance, and like I was saying, you got to hedge a little bit given the type of team that Ohio State is. But I still I still want to see a complete weekend performance. That middle game was it was a bit dicey until Ohio State started making mistakes. I want to see a complete domination weekend. The more 12 runs, fewer, 2 runs.
Quote, I want to see a complete domination weekend, he says about a team that is 6-1.
Hey,
I'm happy where they're at. I wish we had that St. John's game back, but I don't know. Like I said last week, you meatloaf the rest of the season. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I'll take the 3 out of 3 too.
I'll take the 3 out of 3 this weekend, but we will get to that. Let's see here. The last couple of sports before we get to our major topics. Club lacrosse lost to a Utah Valley. Oh, never heard
I know,
that
right?
school before. Close loss to Utah Valley. Club lacrosse is, man, that league is
Club lacrosse.
Interesting. And then demolishing Boston College, who was ranked on Sunday. And then club swimming, Mr. Grant's, hometown at Georgia Tech, effectively, traveled to Gainesville, placing second. And then the final sport that we wanted to get to, men's basketball, played 2 games over the past week. They beat Wake Forest by, what is this number? By 7, 86-79, in a game that it was weird at points, I think, but Tech did pull away late, so I'm more or less satisfied with that. And then in the final game of the week, Tech lost at Syracuse in a close one, a little closer than the final score entails, 72-79. Jake, do you have any thoughts on the back part of our slate here?
The back part, honestly, again, I was in Gainesville. So long, such a weird pool. That's a different topic. I don't know how great team swims there because that is not a nice place. So to be completely honest, I did not see a single second of the Syracuse game. I know Moses Wright played well because that's what Twitter and Instagram told me.
Oh yeah,
I saw highlights. But my thoughts on Wake Forest are it's about freaking time we beat them there. I feel like we've lost a couple of them recently that were just infuriating.
Yeah, I will note that one was weird too. I mentioned it was weird. Let's look at a couple of stats here. The stat profiles look pretty similar. Tech and Wake Forest shot about 57% from 2-point range, around 32% from 3. 72% from the line. Like I mean, there's obviously plus or minus 2% for either team, but this was a very tight game, and it just came down to free throws at the end, if I remember the end of the game right. And Tech actually made its free throws at the end. They shot 74% for the game on free throws. What a concept.
That's how I felt watching women's basketball on Sunday.
Yeah. So to round this one out, Tech in the Wake Forest game had a 57% post-game win expectancy. And then in the Cuse game, which I mentioned was a lot closer than the final score indicated, we had a projected score margin of 1 point instead of the actual 7. And the post-game win expectancy for Tech was actually 48.4 in this one. So it really came down to, well, 1, free throws, and 2, I know we've talked before about momentum not being, based in math, but it really did seem that coming into that second half, Cuse just tore it up completely, got the momentum on their side, got the crowd back into it, and just streaked down the stretch.
Yeah, Carrier Dome crowd can't be understated. Hard place to play, even if it is massive.
It is important to note, despite how sad it is, Tech did lead this game by, I believe, 11 at halftime and lost by 7. So there is that. I think we have spilled all of the ink and used up all of the battery life that audio uses with regards to men's basketball. So let us pivot to the other type of basketball that we have been hinting at that we're going to talk to at length, women's basketball. Mr. Grant, do you want to set the stage for us, please?
Sure. We got 2 ranked teams in this week, both at McCamish. Thursday night was Louisville, headlined by two former Tech standouts, both named Elizabeth, who transferred after their freshman year as part of the coaching fallout at the end of last year that kind of had us all pretty shook. And then we took Florida State on Sunday for the second time this year. They came into the game ranked 17th in the country. Is that enough exposition, or would you like some more?
No, I will fill in the gaps.
Cool.
Actually, I meant yes, but I will fill in the gaps. English is hard. Anyway, so like Jake said, number 5 Louisville. Tech lost that one by 11. I think that scoreline is a little deceptive because of late game fouls, but that was a tough one. That was definitely a winnable game, and Tech lost the plot of that down the stretch. But the good news is that they edged out Florida State at the death, 65 to 62 on Sunday, which was a very good bump in their tournament resume. And I think that's the main thing that we have to discuss today. With one game left, being at Clemson next Sunday, and then the ACC tournament, Tech sits at, I want to say, I had a graphic here. They sit at an 11th or a 12 seed versus Indiana, and they'd be in the same region as Baylor. Baylor would be the 1 seed in that region. So, initial thoughts on that setup, how we got there.
I do have some thoughts about Thursday. You're right that it was a closer game than expected. I don't know. I'm not going to pin it all on this, but my one, I always leave a loss unless it's a total blowout with one like angry fan moment, where you're just
yes, I'm aware.
Blah blah blah, and a lot of times about the refs or whatever. But there was 2 times where Georgia Tech spotted Louisville a 9-point lead, which wasn't great. But there were 2 times when Tech had clawed all the way or almost all the way back, and then had a Louisville player go down hard, take an extended injury timeout, get attention on the court, get helped off, sit on the bench, only for that player to come back in the next substitution or 2. And yes, gameswomanship, whatever, but that was a little bit sketchy. I didn't like that. It was big momentum. It's not like the old men's basketball where you get the timeout called and then the official timeout comes in like 30 seconds later and that kills momentum. Because I've seen that plenty. Krzyzewski did that in the Duke game, but man, those infuriated me because Tech builds up all this momentum. They get it within 2 or 3 points, 4 points, and then bam, you're back in the hole. That's demoralizing. One of them was it wound up being going down hard on a made 3 and a foul did get called. So it went from being down 4 to being down 7. That's tough, you know? But that being said, in terms of fouls, Tech was pretty solid on that. Louisville didn't go to the line all that much. Tech played a much cleaner game. Forced 14 turnovers to Tech's 6. Got out rebounded pretty noticeably at the start, but they must have come back because it wound up only being a difference of 3. So it wasn't for lack of hustle and heart, but I don't know if you saw the 3-point line. That was a 1 for 12 mark. So that was, if not for the momentum, gameswomanship kind of stuff, going ice cold from 3 is probably our biggest, I guess, yikes, our biggest downfall in the game.
Yeah, and I think I can find the 2 points that you're talking about in terms of gameswomanship. There, if I look at the game flow chart here, so there is 1 point in the early part of the second quarter where Tech got within 1, and then there's another point where Tech got within 3 during the late stages of the third quarter. Those are the 2 nearest points on this game flow graph in that game. But the bigger problem in that game was undoubtedly going 1 of 12 from 3, which is it's a very uncharacteristic thing for this team.
It's been a defining factor in their losses, though, if you look at it.
Yes. I'll agree. I think in their losses, it's generally been just an inability to shoot anything, which also came through in this one. Tech went sub 30% from the field, which is not a winning formula whatsoever. I don't know what to say beyond that.
And if you look at the Florida State stats, they turned it right around, shooting above 60% from 3. So not to say the team lives and dies on it, but when it's working for them, they've won some big games. Beating Florida State on the road by a lot.
Pivot to that game.
Yeah.
Let's use this opportunity to pivot. So this one was tight. Tech pulled away for a bit at the end of the third quarter and just gained a ton of momentum, and then went ice cold for about 5 minutes in the fourth quarter. And this is after coming back. So again, looking at the game flow chart, the game was pretty close until about halfway through the second quarter, tied 28-28. And then Florida State explodes and takes a lead that was as big as, trying to find a good point, it was about 7 to 9 points. And then Tech cuts that down, ties the game again by the end of the third quarter, that leads heading into the fourth quarter, and then just goes straight up cold during most of the fourth quarter. So it's a very, I think we've seen this game flow chart almost exactly in a lot of these a lot of these conference games, talking about that third quarter nap, except in this case, it came at an even worse time. So, not great, but they did overcome it. So, what are you going to do?
That's better than kind of a worst case scenario. So not going to complain too much about a win. The 15-2 run was pretty impressive, where they took that lead back.
Mm-hmm.
It was good to see them shooting well. Obviously, it's something they can do and has given them some success, or not some success, a lot of success, especially with well-regarded teams. So not gonna fault them too much for trying to stick to that game plan, even on Thursday when it wasn't quite working out for them. But I don't know. They're definitely a very bubbly bubble team. I think they need a win at Clemson and probably at least one in the ACC tournament to say, okay, I'm comfortable with their chances. Because again, that Clemson's going to be an RPI hit, and we don't.
Yeah,
we
you
don't
need
have
to
a lot of
counteract
wiggle room.
that one.
Yeah.
You absolutely need to counteract that one. And I mean, looking at this draw right now, I want to move out of this Dallas regional. I do not feel super comfortable about. I mean, you play Indiana. I don't know how good Indiana is. I'm not even going to guess. But let's say you get past that. Let's say you get past Texas A&M, which is an entirely winnable game.
A team we've lost already this season.
But lost close. It's a winnable game. And you get past both of those, and then you meet Baylor. It sets up exactly like the last time that Tech women's basketball made the tournament, where they advanced to the Sweet 16, if I remember correctly, in 2012, and then got demolished by Brittany Griner and Baylor.
Yeah, you're right. It was a Sweet 16.
Yeah.
It's tough, and you're not going to be doing a lot of moving up, and a lot of moving down is going to move you out of the bracket. So I don't know, man. That 5-game skid is really coming back to haunt them. The couple overtime losses too. It'd be great to have one or two of those back. The Virginia Tech game, chief among them. But I think Trevor Davidson said it well. I see this shaking out to be a number one in the WNIT seed more than I see it shaking out being a 12 seed in the NCAA tournament. Through, again, no fault of Tech's own in the nitty gritty. It's just how things play out sometimes. Obviously, bracketology wouldn't be such a burgeoning business if there wasn't a little bit of that like unknown aspect to it. But a win against Clemson is a must, and then a win, maybe even two, in the ACC tournament would really help us out, I think.
Yeah, I think you already count Clemson as an RPI hit. Like that, even if you win that game, and you have to win that game. That is, you 100% have to win that game. Yeah, that's effectively a loss in terms of RPI. So you need to get 2 in the ACC tournament to be comfortable. Well, not even comfortably in at that point, just in that last 4 conversation.
If you're Nell Fortner and you don't get that last 4 in, what do you tell the team? Because a lot of teams that wind up on that bubble kind of wilt. Teams that expect the berth and don't get it.
No, you play like you don't have it. You play until it's in the bag. You play like it's not in the bag. I think something that both of us say is that like nothing is deserved, everything is earned, right? And I think that comes back here. Like you win the games that are put in front of you, and you hope that your RPI is high enough and the intangibles there are high enough to bump you in. WNIT is not terrible. Like a 1 seed in WNIT is not a terrible end of the season. That I will, especially when we came into the season thinking it was going to be a dumpster fire.
Yeah, and that's home. That's playing at home. If you're the number one overall the entire tournament, and if you're not, till at least the Final Four.
Yeah, and that's fine. Like, I mean, we want them to get into the tournament for the first time since in 8, 9 years. But at the same time, given the context of this season, I would not be dissatisfied. I think we had this discussion in our Slack the other day. It's like this season, for all intents and purposes, has been a success, regardless of what happens over the next 2 weeks, whether they get into the NCAA tournament or not. It has still been successful because the program is still functional and
Yeah,
it's still winning. It has a winning record. It's 7 games over 500. It's 8 games over 500. It's mid-table in the ACC. This is still a successful season. It's not as successful as it might not end as successful as it could be. It might not have been successful as it could have been. But like Trevor was telling both of us, there's four-star freshmen, incoming freshmen for next season. This team is going
yeah.
to reload.
I had not even looked at the recruiting class until he mentioned. I was blown away.
After the type of recruiting that has gone on at the other side of McCamish the past couple of years,
Nell went out and did the thing. So good for her. She's going to need to replace Pond, who is the heart and soul of our lineup. And I think the biggest shame if we don't make the NCAA tournament is that she would not get one while she's on the flats. But I don't know. It's a little bit early to look towards the draft, but I think she has at least some sort of professional career in front of her. But it would be nice to send her out with a tournament appearance.
vamp for a bit. I'm gonna look up WNBA mock drafts.
Okay. Yeah. ACC Freshman of the Year. She has been through a lot. Nobody should really have to go through oil that the women's basketball team experienced last year. That's tough on active players, on alumni, on fans. It's a nice parting gift. Granted, it'd be nice to go all 4 years. If this recruiting class pans out, I think things do start to turn in that direction. We keep most of our factors. It's one of those things you don't appreciate about college sports before you kind of get there and realize, like, you know what, like, I'm graduating, they have to graduate too, or maybe I was just more naive as a kid. But it's one of those. All right, now we're grown up, and then the next crop will grow up and whatnot. And now I'm waxing poetically on the inherent structures.
I'm gonna cut into you. I'm gonna cut into you being sappy. She is not listed on any mock draft that I can find, but I would not be surprised. I mean, there's also international leagues for women's basketball. She will be picked up, and I'm confident that she can play at the next level. But to be fair, there's still at least there's at least 2 games left this season. So let's come out firing on all cylinders and see what she and the rest of the girls can do.
I would go as far as to say there's at least 3. It's just a matter of whether that third one is somewhere that's not Georgia Tech or somewhere that is.
I guess we'll find out. All right, what?
Yep.
Let's move on to the final major thing that we wanted to talk about, which is women's tennis. And we're running a little short on time, so I'm just going to set the mood real quick with what you said, if I can find it in my documents here, with what you said about this weekend for women's tennis. They swept number 49 Boston College, and then upset number 9 Virginia. This team is on the precipice of a top 10 ranking, but at the same time, we've also said, yeah, they have a couple holes. They're not as good as that Final Four team from a couple years ago. But I mean, they're about to be top 10 team after this week. They are good. They are certifiably good.
I I had this conversation with Ethan today in Tech Rec of all places, and not to be a downer, but I think that they are performing above their ranking. If you look at UTR, Kenya Jones is great. She is the sixth best singles UTR for Court 1 players in the conference.
That is a
Vicky
lot
Flores,
of filters on that one.
Vicky Flores on Court 2, her usual court, again, sixth in the conference. Gia Cohen, again, playing great this year, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, eighth in the conference. Court 4 sees Nami Otsuka at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th in the conference, or there's about 9th or 10th. You got Rosie Gross on Court 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th in the conference. And then down on 6 is Dova at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11th in the conference. Those are not particularly top 10 worthy rankings, but yet they keep winning. On UVA.
I mean, I think it's something that we talk about in other sports, right? What's the best example that I can think of? It might be in baseball. Teams like the Twins last year, they won a ton of games based on the combined hitting of that squad, not necessarily on the back of one player. Basketball a couple of times has been more of a team effort. I mean, basketball is a little bit more of an individual sport, but in some cases, I think we've seen entire teams that don't have one superstar, one media starlet to control all of the attention. I know football has been there have been football teams like that in the last couple of years where there's just not one personality that takes up all the atmosphere. And I think this team is like that. They're not highly ranked. They don't have one centerpiece player like Paige Hergen was a couple of years ago. But at the same time, they, like you said, they're still winning. They're ranked number 11 for a reason. They went and upset number 13 Ohio State. They played Stanford tough. We're talking about a team that is competed at a very high level, and overperforming right now or not, it's still proofs in the pudding right now.
Yeah, if you pull up Virginia's numbers, they match out pretty similar to Tech. They're ranked 9th in the country. They have a basically all American Court 1, and then on Court 2 they're rated lower than Tech. 3 about the same. 4 and 5 a little higher. 6 a little higher. But again, they don't dominate on every court. So perhaps it's not necessary to, like you said, you can pick up other things. This obviously doesn't rank doubles from what I'm pulling off of, and obviously doubles is a point of this and another way that you can double dip on some of your best players and how they play together. But I don't know. I run a lot of numbers on swimming, particularly ACC and Illinois high school swimming, and you cannot win in team scored swimming with one great athlete, right? You can place in 2 events, but you'll never have your relays. You'll never have that all around what it takes to get there, right? And just like in baseball, you can't have one all world pitcher or whatever, because you got to rotate.
You can't have Mike Trout on your team and make the playoffs. It's what the Angels have been doing for 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a little bit different in softball because you can put a pitcher in the circle and they can pitch every other game come in a lot of games in relief, whatever. But then at basketball you can have an individual standout that really powers your team. But I think tennis, well, not necessarily on the baseball side of things, needing a bunch of ridiculous talent all over the place. Not saying pure depth, but I think tennis falls pretty close to that swimming model, even more so than track does in a lot of ways, because doubles is kind of the inverse of a relay. You don't get the double point for scoring the doubles. In fact, it's lower valued. But you can double dip. You put your court one player back out there to try and get another hack at it. Again, I'm rambling. It's almost 1 a.m. here in Atlanta, so I do need to go to bed. But there's that aspect of you can't just have one great player and win. Miami, though they did beat us last week, has the best singles player in the conference. But on every other court, they match up to us about where Virginia does, and we do fall off on 6. So not great, but Georgia Tech is balanced enough to do the thing, and the men are similar, not the same in terms of deviation from the norm. There's a lot more bunching towards the middle in ACC men's tennis, but I don't know. Time will tell if the women are for real, but they're not for real, I guess, is my convoluted conclusion.
Thank you for bringing that entire discussion to no substantive conclusion.
I feel like that's what we do best here.
Yeah, I mean, we did that for everything baseball related a couple weeks ago. That was pretty fun.
Yeah, same with women's baseball like 3 weeks ago.
Rampant speculation is kind of our forte.
Yep.
All right, let's wrap it up since it is almost 1 a.m. on the East Coast. What is coming up this weekend? What strikes your eye? What tickles your fancy here?
Well, we got baseball and basketball tomorrow night, tomorrow afternoon. That'll be two different kinds of interesting. Baseball versus Garner-Webb, and Clemson men's basketball. That's the first 2 games against them in the next 2 weeks. My big thing to watch.
Weird scheduling quirk there.
Hey, I'll be at both. But Wednesday through Saturday, we got men's swimming and diving at the ACC championships. This will be an interesting one to watch. Kyle Pampudis, Christian Ferraro, they're the class of the conference. They lose a little bit not having Rodrigo with them anymore because he graduated last year. But I think if this team is for real and if we want to see them do well, obviously if we want to see them do well, the NCAAs, they got to get some times here. But, there's a lot of room for wiggle in that middle chunk of the ACC, middle upper chunk. So if Tech can get a couple great swims here from that depth, they can't rely only on their top 1, 2, 3 swimmers. But if the relays come together, if Kyle and Christian turn in good performances, but down the roster we see some of those solid swims, maybe we'll see a good result there. Not saying we're going to get first. I don't know if anybody can catch NC State or the other guys at the top, but definitely that's my pick to watch. Other than of course the UGA baseball series, which all of you should be watching without us telling you to.
I will say swimming and diving is on ACC Network Extra, and it's kind of fun to throw on in the background. It is. This is an aside, but I do definitely enjoy watching competitive swimming casually. It is kind of fun, and even if you're not into it, it makes some pretty good background music or background noise.
One of us, Akshay. One of us.
All right, rounding out the rest of the slate here, track and field is at the ACC Indoor Championships. Softball is playing the I-75 Challenge at home. There's games versus Iowa State and Penn State. Ooh, boy, lots of states here. Baseball is playing Athens the entire weekend. The rubber match of which was shifted from SunTrust Park to Coolray Field up in Gwinnett, which is kind of lame, but we'll deal with it. And then what else? is fun to point out. Sunday's a busy day. You have women's tennis at noon at Ken Byers, then women's basketball at 1 at Clemson, then softball at 1 at home versus Ryder, and then the 2 p.m. rubber match versus Athens in baseball. And yeah, that's a busy, busy day. Not even and I totally forgot to mention men's golf at the top, but they're in Las Vegas and far away. So
Yeah.
it's another busy week. I think we're hitting the real heavy season once we're getting into March. So
Oh yeah.
it's gonna be Super Saturdays and Super Sundays for the rest of the month.
I was gonna say Super Friday too. Even we got a doubleheader in tennis versus Clemson, men and women, bookending or splicing the softball games, I guess you could say, and Saturday the 2 softball games, baseball at home, and men's basketball versus Miami. So a lot to see if you're making your way to Midtown this week.
All right, I think that about wraps it up for this week. We need to let Mr. Grant out in Atlanta go to bed. So, do you have any final thoughts before we call it a night, or honestly mid-morning at this point for you?
Honestly, this is earlier than I got to bed in Gainesville, so it's a win.
Wow, party animal.
Not partying, no sir. But that's story for another time.
All right, we will see you next week, everybody. Have fun.